Warringah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I want to start out by shouting out, actually, we have some school students here watching, and it's always exciting to see them here because the decisions we make in this place very much impact the prospects and opportunities they will have in their life as they grow up. And whilst many young people too often think they're not interested in politics, I always remind them, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Decisions will be made that impact your life, and whether you like politics or not, it is in your life, because we make the decisions and the laws that ultimately will shape their opportunities. And that is very relevant for the debate we have today in relation to these bills to give effect to the government's budget. Now, some aspects I support, but some I am really deeply frustrated that we are in the situation we're in. Australia needs serious tax reform. We need a system that is fairer, more efficient, that rewards work, that improves housing affordability, but also that supports productivity and ensures the burden of fiscal repair is shared fairly. But good reform is not just about the policy objective. It is also about the process, about how you get there and how you bring the community along, the consultation that you engage in with communities, with business, with all the sectors. And unfortunately, the process the government has followed here in this instance is just not good enough. This is a substantial bill. It contains really important and significant reforms, some very much needed. But it also bundles together several very different measures, and measures that do not have social licence or support at this stage. Some have broad community support and clear policy rationales. Others, they're complex, contentious and far-reaching, and the government itself still cannot articulate exactly what will be the unintended consequences, what will be the scale or the reach of these measures, who will be caught by them, where will the carve-out be, what will be the definitions of who this applies to. The government is asking this parliament to pass major economic reform without providing the modelling, the evidence, the consultation needed to understand its full impact, or the clear information about how small business will be defined, what carve-outs are going to be negotiated, who will in fact be impacted in the end. That is not how you make significant tax reform that lasts, that has social licence and consensus. So that's why it is so incredibly frustrating when I look at the debate in relation to this reform. I know major tax reform requires transparency and scrutiny. It requires courage, and it requires bringing the community along. And instead, what the government has chosen to do is package housing reform, cost of living measures, capital gains tax changes, trust taxation, small business impacts into one omnibus bill. And from many members of government, we're hearing the justifications about this is around fairness of affordability of property. But this bill goes way beyond that. And the public isn't buying it. They're not accepting that this is just about making property and home ownership more achievable. And that's why it just is so incredibly frustrating the course the government has chosen to take in relation to this. And in particular, that we can't really, as members in this place, do our job of scrutinising this legislation properly. The time for the debate in relation to this bill has been inadequate. The consultation, the refusal to have it properly investigated at committee, these are all major issues. Now, there are some parts I very much support and welcome. Prior to the last election, I went to my community supporting winding back capital gains when it came to property and investors. There was a strong case there. I was frustrated when the government, in fact, and the Prime Minister made repeated promises it wouldn't touch it, because ultimately these are areas that need changing. We have to pull the demand-side levers when it comes to property pricing, as well as the supply levers. So, again, it just goes to show just the political manoeuvring and the disappointment that you're bundling together all the various aspects of this legislation and these reforms on a vague promise that she'll be right. We will work out the details later. Just trust us with that. That's just not good enough for the majority of the Australian people. And it's not good enough for me, because I take the responsibility seriously for the people of Warringah to ensure that the legislation has the detail, that I have the details before me when I make a decision to support legislation or not. So let's unpack what is in this legislation and why it's so frustrating, because there are clear groups that are frustrating.
And as I said, it's not good enough for me, the detail we have so far, but it's also not good enough for the majority of the people from Warringah who have contacted my office. There are clear groups in relation to those people really frustrated and disappointed with the government. They want change to property, to capital gains tax in relation to property investors. They want affordability for first homeowners to have a fair shot and to not compete with investors. But they also want to have an opportunity for aspiration. They want an opportunity that after they have worked their day job, that they have paid their wages, they have contributed, that if they are going to take risks, they're going to invest and try and raise our productivity, build a buffer through investment, through shares, through a small business, a start-up, that those risks that they are prepared to take can be rewarded. And what essentially the government is saying is we will put everyone on an equal par, that it doesn't matter if you're just prepared to shop for a job or take risks and not be paid for years as you invest into an opportunity, you will all be treated the same way. That is not how we grow productivity. That is not how we encourage investment. It is not how we are going to make the best of Australia going forward. So, in relation to what the bill actually does, it has the 4 key elements of the government's tax reform package. Schedule 1, which is the most contentious. It makes significant changes to capital gains tax arrangements. It replaces the existing 50% capital gains tax discount with a return to cost-based indexation and introduces a 30% minimum tax rate on real capital gains from 1 July 2027. I have serious concerns about the breadth of Schedule 1, and I'll return to that. But I have to say up front, the whole indexation model is confusing, the public does not understand it, and you are not taking the community on board with you on that. Schedule 2 limits negative gearing for residential property investments to new builds. This reform, I would argue, has broad community support. Under the current system, investors can deduct losses from property investments against their income while later benefiting from discounted capital gains. That combination has helped push prices up, and it made it harder for first home buyers to compete against property investors. Although people who bought properties before May 2026, they will keep the existing rules. So it's been really clear with the community. They can essentially bank those profits, the gains they have made. It is simply setting a line in the sand to say that moving forward, the opportunity for property investment will be, and those advantages will be around new builds, which will help boost supply. These are good things. This part of the bill is targeted as it applies to residential property. It maintains incentives for new housing supply, and importantly, existing investment decisions are protected through those transitional arrangements. In simple terms, this does not abolish negative gearing entirely, it just redirects it away from established homes towards new housing supply. Schedule 3 introduces the Working Australian Tax Offset, providing a $250 for working Australian taxpayers. At a time when households are under enormous cost of living pressure, any additional support is welcome. But let's be honest, $250 a year in a year's time will not make a meaningful difference to many households facing rising mortgage repayments, rents, insurance, groceries, energy and health care costs now. Schedule 4 introduces a $1,000 instant tax deduction for work-related expenses. This is a practical measure that will simplify tax time for some Australians. But again, let's be clear. If you're already claiming deductions are greater than that $1,000, it's business as usual and the situation hasn't changed. So this instant tax deduction allows eligible taxpayers to claim up to $1,000 of work-related expenses without itemising and substantiating every claim. So yes, this will reduce complexity. It's welcome. Workers with straightforward deductions should not have to navigate unnecessary administration. But again, this is being packaged as some phenomenal cost of living relief when, for many people, it will have little or no financial impact because this will all be in 12 months' time. More importantly, this bill provides no meaningful relief for those in our communities doing it the toughest. ACOS has highlighted that more than 4 million people on the lowest incomes, including people receiving job seeker, pensions and single parents without paid work, will not benefit from these tax measures. Job seeker remains around $409 per week, less than half the minimum wage, while housing, food and essential costs continue to rise. I've raised this with the Treasurer. The irony is we are in the second term, on the second year of a Labor government. The government has only raised job seeker once in 2023. It was a minimal change with a promise of more to come, and yet here we are 3 years later, nothing in this budget for the most vulnerable. This is not just a welfare issue, it's a dignity issue and also a workforce participation issue. When people cannot afford to secure housing, transport, healthcare or basic necessities, it becomes harder, not easier, to get back into employment. A strong economy is one where everyone has the opportunity to participate. This bill does not meet that test. Now, the most significant part of this bill is Schedule 1, which makes broad changes to capital gains tax arrangements. Currently, individuals, trusts, partnerships usually receive a 50% capital gains tax discount if they hold an asset for more than 12 months. Now, with this change, the discount would be replaced with a minimum 30% tax rate indexed to inflation. The family home remains exempt from these changes, and so will new builds. But I want to be very clear. I support reforming capital gains tax settings when it comes to investment property. For too long, Australia's housing system has been distorted by tax settings that favour those who already own assets over those trying to buy their first home. In Warringah, I hear about it every day. Young people who grew up locally are wondering whether they will ever be able to afford to live in the community they call home. Parents and grandparents tell me they have benefited from rising property values, but they are deeply concerned about what this means for their children and grandchildren. Many people who have done well from the current system recognise it is no longer delivering fairness. The combination of negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions have encouraged investment into existing housing rather than new supply Australia desperately needs. Housing should ultimately be about creating a home, not simply a vehicle for investment or tax advantage. So I commend the government for being willing to tackle an area of reform that has been politically difficult for decades. But what you've done is bundle this with other issues that you don't have social licence for. Schedule 1 goes much further than just property, and that's where it just falls apart. Schedule 1 extends these changes across shares, managed funds, ETFs, business equity, trusts and other capital assets. I've heard from young professionals, small business owners, startups, founders, families who feel completely blindsided by these changes. One constituent told me she and her partner have done everything they were told to do. They've studied, they've worked hard, they've got big HECS debts, they've built careers, they've borrowed responsibly within their means. They have good incomes, but between high housing costs, bills and everyday expenses, they still feel like they are barely getting ahead. And that is their aspiration that the government is whacking with this bill. They're not wealthy investors living off passive income. They're working Australians trying to build some financial security, a buffer. For many young Australians who cannot get into the property market, investing in shares, ETFs or startups has become one of the few pathways available to them to build that nest egg, that economic buffer. The government says this is about intergenerational fairness. Well, intergenerational fairness is not achieved by making housing slightly fairer while reducing other pathways for young Australians to save, invest, build businesses and create financial security. We must be careful that in trying to fix one unfairness, we're not creating another. If the target is speculative investment in existing housing, then target that. Do not drag productive investment, modest savings, employee equity, start-up capital into the same net without clear evidence and information and modelling around unintended consequences. That is the central problem with this bill. Small and medium businesses in Warringah have raised similar concerns. Shares, start-ups, business equity are not the same as passive property investment. For many entrepreneurs, early employees and investors, capital gains are the reward for taking risk, building a business, accepting lower wages and backing innovation. There can be years of no dividend from an investment. And the government now, by saying that it should all be treated on a flat way, is not recognising the risk and the years of delay that go into being an entrepreneur. These are not multinational corporations with large balance sheets. They are often local employers, family businesses who have spent decades building something. COSBOA have raised their concern around the definition of small business, and I hear from the government there are negotiations. But again, here we are being asked to vote on a legislation. We don't know where it's actually going to land, who is going to be carved out, where the definition of small business will be. So there are so many issues, and then when we have the impact on trusts, there are some 370,000 small family businesses operate through trusts, and yet we don't have a clear visibility. So there's not enough time to raise all the concerns with this bill, but I seek to move the amendment as circulated in my name so that more investigation into this legislation can occur.